There is a particular kind of silence that exists only inside a home where someone has stopped leaving. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest, something heavier than that, the kind that settles into the walls over months, that becomes so familiar it starts to feel like a personality. Like it belongs to you now, like you belong to it. And if you've ever felt the front door of your own home become something you dread, not because anything bad is behind it, but because everything unknown is, then this video was made for you. Not to diagnose you, not to fix you with 3 steps and a motivational quote, but to sit beside you in that silence for a while and tell you something that the world outside rarely bothers to say. You are not broken, you are responding. Most people who look at someone who never leaves their house see laziness. They see weakness. They see someone who has simply given up on life, pulled the curtains shut on their own potential, and decided to rot. And if you've been on the receiving end of that perception from a parent, a friend, a voice inside your own head at 2 in the morning, you know how much weight that judgment carries, how it presses down on you, how it makes the idea of explaining yourself feel more exhausting than the very thing you're being judged for. But psychology tells a completely different story. What looks like giving up from the outside is often, from the inside, an act of profound self-preservation. What looks like laziness is often the final strategy of a nervous system that has been overwhelmed for a very, very long time. And to truly understand why some people's worlds quietly shrink to 4 walls and a familiar ceiling, we have to go somewhere most people never think to look. We have to go back to before the house ever became a refuge. Think about the brain for a moment, not as the seat of ambition or intelligence or personality, but as what it fundamentally is at its core, a prediction machine. Every experience you have ever had, every outcome you've ever witnessed, every moment where something went wrong or right or sideways, your brain cataloged it, filed it away, built a model of the world based on that data, and it uses that model constantly, invisibly, to decide what is safe and what is not. When you were young, that model was being built from scratch, and the world was actively writing into it. If you grew up in an environment where social situations consistently produced pain, where a wrong word at the dinner table invited an explosion, where school hallways were gauntlets of cruelty, where the people who were supposed to make you feel safe were instead the source of the most confusing kind of hurt, your brain was learning something very specific about the world outside yourself. It was learning that the outside is unpredictable, that people are unpredictable, that no matter how carefully you prepare, no matter how precisely you calibrate your words and your expressions and your laugh, you cannot fully control what comes back to you. And for a nervous system that is already running at maximum sensitivity, already braced for impact in a way that most people around you never seem to be, that unpredictability doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels dangerous. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, a state of chronic alertness where the threat detection system never fully powers down. It's most commonly associated with trauma, with childhoods where safety was conditional, where love had terms and conditions attached, where you learned very early that the world required a version of you that was constantly performing, constantly monitoring, constantly preparing for the thing that hadn't happened yet but always felt like it was about to. And here is where something subtle and devastating begins. The home, your bedroom, your apartment, that specific corner of the couch, starts to mean something different from what it means to most people. For most people, home is a place to decompress after the world. But for someone whose nervous system is running this particular program, home becomes something more profound than that. It becomes the only confirmed safe outcome. Think about that phrase, confirmed, safe outcome, your brain has enough data on this place. It knows the walls, it knows the sounds, it knows that nothing in this room will suddenly shift its expression and make you feel like you got something wrong. And the front door, that ordinary rectangle of wood and hinges that most people walk through without a second thought, begins, slowly, quietly, to carry a different weight. It becomes the threshold between the known and the unknown, between the manageable and the unmanageable, between the self you can hold together and the self you're terrified might fall apart the moment someone is watching. Behavioral psychologists have a name for what happens next. They call it the avoidance loop, and it is one of the most elegant and cruel mechanisms the human mind has ever developed. Here is how it works. You encounter something that triggers anxiety, a social event, a phone call, a trip to a grocery store that suddenly feels like it requires an amount of energy you simply do not have. The anxiety rises, your heart rate climbs, your chest tightens, and then you do something that provides immediate relief. You cancel, you don't go, you stay, and the anxiety drops. And your nervous system, which was never asking philosophical questions about your long-term well-being, does exactly what it was designed to do. It rewards the behavior that reduced the threat. It reinforces the choice that made the discomfort stop. The relief becomes the lesson, and your brain, brilliant and loyal and entirely short-sighted in this particular way, learns something it will not easily unlearn. It learns that avoiding the thing was the correct response, that the threat was real, that you were right to stay inside. And the next time the anxiety rises, the pull toward avoidance will be slightly stronger. The threshold for what feels manageable will be slightly lower. The world outside will have shrunk, almost imperceptibly, by just a little more. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is classical conditioning applied to your own existence. You are, in the most precise psychological sense, being trained by your own nervous system, using your own relief as the reward to stay inside. Now, there is a question worth sitting with here, because it matters more than it might initially seem. Where did the sensitivity come from? Not everyone who encounters a difficult social situation develops this relationship with their own front door. Not everyone who has a bad day at school or an awkward conversation or a failed relationship ends up slowly withdrawing from the world. So what distinguishes the person who bounces back from the person whose world begins, quietly, to contract? Research points to something researchers sometimes call microtrauma, a concept that doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves because it lacks the dramatic clarity of what most people picture. When they hear the word trauma, microtrauma isn't a single catastrophic event. It isn't something you can point to on a timeline and say, that is where everything changed. It's something far more insidious than that. It's 1,000 small moments of feeling like you were too much or not enough. It's the parent who didn't mean to crush you, but whose disappointment settled into your chest anyway, again and again, until you started preemptively crushing yourself to beat them to it. It's the classroom where you raised your hand and gave the wrong answer and 23 faces turned toward you and something in your nervous system quietly decided that visibility equals vulnerability. It's the friendship that ended without explanation, the invitation that never came, the version of you that tried everything right and still somehow ended up on the outside. Individually, these moments seem minor. The world would tell you to get over them. People have it so much worse, it says. You're being too sensitive, and so you agree. You agree so many times, in so many ways, that you stop trusting your own account of your own experience. You decide that your sensitivity is a defect, that your need for safety is embarrassing, that the exhaustion you feel around other people is a problem to be solved rather than a signal to be understood. And you turn inward, not because you want a small life, not because you have given up on connection. Often it's the opposite. You want it more than almost anything. But because the cost of reaching for it has started to feel higher than you can afford, the home becomes a well. And for a while, it has water in it. And wells, when left untouched long enough, go dry. What begins as protection slowly becomes a prison that you decorated yourself. The curtains you chose, the blanket that smells like safety, the routine that asks nothing of you, all of it yours, all of it comfortable, all of it quietly costing you something you won't fully calculate until much later, because the world outside wasn't just taking from you, it was also giving you something. Evidence that you could handle things, that you could stumble and recover, that other people, for all their unpredictability, could also surprise you with kindness you didn't expect. And when you stop going out there, you stop collecting that evidence. The fear doesn't stay the same size in your absence. It grows, it fills the space you gave it. It starts narrating your life in your own voice, telling you that you were right to stay, that nothing out there was ever really meant for you anyway. And that is perhaps the quietest tragedy of all, not the isolation itself, but the story the isolation tells you about yourself while you're in it. Here is the reframe that changes everything. The part of you that retreated was not the weak part. It was the part that was still trying to survive. And survival instincts, however misplaced, are not shameful. They are evidence that some part of you still wanted to be here, still fought for you in the only way it knew how. Healing, then, is not about defeating that part. It is about updating it, gently, the way you'd correct someone you love, not someone you're ashamed of. One small door, one quiet step, not to conquer the world, but just to remind your nervous system that the world is still there, still survivable, still occasionally, unexpectedly worth it. If these words found you in a quiet room tonight, know that being found is already a beginning. You are not alone in this. And you never really were.